السلام عليكم ورحمة الله نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. For some time now, brothers have been requesting me to speak about the advices of Luqman and his son, which are mentioned in the Quran, and they consist of some very important pieces of information, reminders for all of us. Surah Luqman opens up with a very strong description of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His power, His might, how He does not rely on anything, does not depend on anything, and how He created the heavens without pillars, and how He fixed mountains into the earth, and how He created all kinds of things and throughout the world, and then provided water from the skies and produced so many different kinds of vegetation. He says, هذا خلق الله. This is all the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فأروني, show me, ماذا خلق الذين من دونه. What has anyone other than Allah created? What have they brought into existence? بل الظالمون في ضلال مبين. The wrongdoers are in clear misguidance. From there, the discussion of Luqman begins. And the discussion of Luqman carries on with the theme of Tawheed. وإذ قال لقمان لابنه وهو يعظه يا بني لا تشرك بالله إن الشرك لظلم عظيم. Before we talk about the advices of Luqman, let's talk a little bit about who Luqman was. Luqman was a pious man, a very wise man, and some have said that he was from the same lineage as Ibrahim alayhi salam. So that would make him a distant relative of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Others have said he was a nephew of Ayyub alayhi salam. And many have said that he was of Nubian descent. That means he was dark skinned, he was black, and he was a person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted in many ways. Some have said that he was around for a very long time. He used to be a judge. And he was still alive when Dawood alayhi salam became appointed as a prophet. And Dawood alayhi salam took him to be his advisor. And the origins of Luqman, in other words, where he started out, are always told to be very humble. He had very humble beginnings. Some say he was a slave, some say he worked for somebody, just doing labor. But he always had this sense of gratitude about him. Always thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for whatever he had given him. And he always spoke the truth. And he was always fair. He was never unfair in any matter. And he never engaged in activities that didn't concern him, or things that didn't concern him. He never engaged in those. Somebody who knew him from his youth and his childhood saw him much later in his life and said, "Weren't you the same person who was a slave of so and so?" Said, "Yes." Said, "How did you get so high? How did you gain such prominence and importance?" So these are the things he mentioned. He said, "I've always been grateful to Allah." All of this was because of A, the decision of Allah. Allah decided to give it to me. From my side, I've always been grateful. I've never delved into things that didn't concern me. I've never been unfair. And I've always spoken the truth. And it was because of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me. Some other narrations mention, he said, I like to stay quiet. I don't open my mouth unless it's absolutely the truth. I like to stay silent most of the time. So these are some of the qualities that he had. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him an option. Either be granted this big ocean of wisdom, or to be granted nubuwah as well. So he chose wisdom. And some say he was granted the choice between being a wise person and being a ruler. He said, I don't want to be a ruler. Because whenever you rule, then you have to face the consequences of perhaps making a mistake, making an error in judgment. And I would rather not have to stand with that burden on the day of judgment. So, in any case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we gave Luqman wisdom. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given it to him, it must be something very substantial, very great, very powerful. But what is wisdom? What is wisdom? He could have said he gave him knowledge, but he doesn't talk about knowledge here. He talks about wisdom. Imam Fakhruddin Razi explains that wisdom is the application of knowledge, the ability to correctly apply knowledge. This is wisdom. He says that there are many people who know of something, but they are unable to apply it. And there are many people who don't know about things, but they gain them anyway. There are people who don't know about money, for example. They don't know how money is used, how to use it, how to grow it. But they end up with a whole bunch of money. So obviously that's not going to be called wisdom, because there's nothing on your part. Then there are people who know of certain things, but they don't know how to apply them. And there are people who know about the benefit of something, but they don't go and apply the benefit. And they don't know the harm of something, so they don't know how to save themselves. Or they know that something is harmful, but they go ahead and do it anyway. And he gives an example. A person jumps off a building, knows it's harmful, but goes and jumps off of it anyway. He's not going to be considered a wise person just because he knew. This person can claim to know that, yes, I know the dangers of this. Well, if you know the dangers of it, why are you doing it? This person will not be considered wise because they do not act according to what they do. Similarly, a person who goes and jumps off and ends up breaking a few limbs, but also ends up falling on top of something that turns to be very precious and very valuable. It turns out to be a treasure inside it. Falls into a dumpster and inside finds all this gold. It's not going to be a wise person either, because that's just a fluke. It so happens that way. There's no wisdom involved. So wisdom means that you know something and you also know how to apply it. And you're able to set your priorities. You're able to determine what is the most important thing at the moment, what is the most necessary thing, and then go after it. You know what the most important thing is, but you're not ready to do it. You don't have the courage, or you don't have the strength to actually do it. You're not a wise person. You know that there is something that is not beneficial. If you go ahead and wasting your time and energy and resources on it, you're not a wise person. So wisdom, he explains, is the correct application of knowledge. So there are many things that we know as useful and useless and helpful and harmful, good and bad. But to what extent do we apply our knowledge of those things? That is the extent of our wisdom. So Luqman had been given this ability to apply things correctly and accurately. And one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him as a part of his wisdom was anishkur lillah. Always remain grateful to Allah. And there's a whole discussion to be held on gratitude. Because no matter how much a person is tested and tried, the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always exceed the tests and the trials of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person is in a constant state of enjoying many, many bounties and gifts from Allah all the time. As long as a person is aware of those and being grateful to those, A, they are keeping the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correct. They're keeping their bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sound and strong. That's one thing. The second thing is that this person will never be overwhelmed with problems. They might experience problems, but they will never be overwhelmed. Because while they're going through problems, their mind is on all the good things that are happening with them. Not necessarily an easy thing to do. Usually when you have a problem, it's a small problem. It could be a toothache, for example. It could be a headache. It could be a little injury that a person got. Or it could be something bad that someone said to us. It could be any of those things. And we just let it overwhelm us. And we can't get it out of our head. And that's all we're thinking about. We're thinking about that one problem. So that problem consumes us, completely swallows us up, and we can't get out of it. We can't think out of it. But a person who is able to recall to their mind the good things that are happening with them, the good things that have happened with them, is able to step out of that. They're able to step out of this bubble that's surrounding them from all sides. And they're able to just pop that bubble and look outside and enjoy life and be happy and content with all of the other things that they do. So how does that happen? It takes a great deal of wisdom. It takes a great deal of thinking. That, okay, yes, I have this issue, I have this issue, I have this issue. These are the things that are not going my way. Now, I can sit there and dwell over them and keep thinking and keep thinking and keep thinking, or I can just put my mind towards other better things in my life. Have I thought about other things that I have? For example, if my health is not so well right now, what about all the other things that I have? What about the friends that I have, the wealth that I have, the luxuries that I have? If I am not doing so well financially, what about other things that Allah has given me, my family, my other things? There will always be things for us to be grateful for in life, no matter how difficult life may seem sometimes. So this is actually, this gratitude does not serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way, does not benefit him, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond being benefited. And the Quran states at this point, to clarify that, وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. Anyone who is grateful is actually doing it for their own benefit. And here's where it gets interesting. Gratitude is actually a therapy for all of the problems that we have. It's a therapy. It's therapeutic to be grateful. And today, people who do counseling, psychiatrists and other people, they are trying to explain to people that, look, you have a lot of things to be grateful for in your life. Think about those things. But the Quran already told us that. And the Quran points out that this is for your own good. It doesn't serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way. Nothing can help Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who does shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not, al-iyadu billah, does not benefit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or do a favor to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who does shukr does it for himself. And that's why you will see that whenever you are grateful in life, you will always be happy. And whenever you are ungrateful, you will be unhappy. Strictly from an emotional and psychological perspective, gratitude is necessary to keep you happy. And we go through this every day, but we don't necessarily think about it. When you have that favorite drink of yours in the morning, whether it's a coffee or something else, you have it, you know that you have it, and you're enjoying it, that's gratitude. It's giving you comfort. You might not be thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, but the fact that you know that you have it is giving you comfort. Now what we do as Muslims is we channel that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that comfort. And that is a stronger approach than just being thankful inside. Oh, okay, I'm thankful. But thankful to who? Are you thankful to yourself, maybe? It could be that you're just thanking yourself because you're the one who went and bought it. You're the one who went and paid for it, so now you're grateful. But who are you grateful to? A Muslim knows that ultimately everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that could be that cup of coffee that you have every morning. It could actually bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if your approach is right. It could be that coat that you like to wear every day. It makes you feel comfortable. If your mind is in the right place, just wearing it to bring you closer to Allah. Everything that we are doing is a mu'amala with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Might sound strange, but that's the fact. So first of all, it's therapeutic to be grateful. And we will find that whenever we will be ungrateful, we will also be unhappy. These two things go hand in hand. Ingratitude and unhappiness will always go together. And that is why there are many people who have lots of things, but they're just unhappy. There are many people who have much more than you and I do, but they're much unhappier than you and I. Why? It's not because they don't have enough things, it's because they're not being grateful. And there are many people who don't have half of what you and I have, but they're much happier, simply because they're much more grateful. A grateful person will always be a happy person. An ungrateful person will always be an unhappy person. A grateful person will find happiness in the darkest moments of life. And an ungrateful person will find misery in even the brightest and happiest moments of life. At that moment, they'll be thinking about that one thing that they don't have. That one thing that didn't go their way. That one thing that didn't happen the way they wanted it to happen. And it will keep them miserable. It will keep them unhappy. And the grateful person will be happy that even one thing went their way. They got even one thing that they were hoping for. So gratitude is the key to happiness. That's all happening inside, within our minds, within our hearts. But let's talk about the bounties themselves. Bounties increase with gratitude. The more grateful a person is for a bounty that they have, the more of that bounty they're going to enjoy. That's the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you thank me, the more I'm going to increase. Because remember, we're not just being grateful, we're being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're thanking Allah for having given it to us. Allah says, you know what, I'm going to give you some more. Just because you responded so nicely, so gratefully, so happily with what I gave you. And ingratitude closes the doors of the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ingratitude closes the doors of ni'mas. Gratitude opens up the doors of ni'mas. If you want something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, very easy, simple formula. If you want something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be happy for what you already have. Allah will give you more. And if today you show unhappiness with what you have today, Allah is not going to give you what you want tomorrow. It's going to get tougher and tougher and tougher for you to get what you want in life. So وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. Whoever shows gratitude does it for their own good. وَمَنْ كَفَرَ. But a person who is ungrateful. Kufr here means ingratitude. وَمَنْ كَفَرَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent. He doesn't need anyone. And He is Hamid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still going to be perfect and worthy of all praise. The fact that you are not grateful to Him doesn't affect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that you are grateful does not make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better than He already is. And the fact that you are ungrateful to Allah does not take anything away from Allah. So that was the first door of wisdom that was opened up to Luqman. Talking about the wisdom of Luqman. The first door of wisdom was the door of gratitude, of shukr. And through that, many other doors opened up for him. Then, one day Luqman was advising his son. And the word that's used is wa'ad. وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ. While he was advising him. Wa'ad, maw'izah. So maw'izah means not just preaching, and it's not telling somebody off either. It's advising. It's advising. And the advice that is given in maw'izah is given with a certain sense of urgency. It's about something that's very important, very relevant. And it's given with the desire to see the person start doing it. So of course, first person one would advise are those that they love the most. So وَإِذْ قَالَ لُقْمَانُ لِابْنِهِ وَهُوَ يَعِظُهُ يَا بُنَيَّ لَا تُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ. O my son, don't ascribe any partner to Allah. إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. Because shirk is the greatest wrongdoing. It is the greatest injustice. Of course, it's the greatest injustice from many ways, from many perspectives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. You take someone else as your creator who hasn't done anything. Unfair, unjust. You bow to someone other than Allah, even though that entity doesn't even exist. This is wrong, it's unfair. It's good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you in the best of forms and honored you as a human being. So you being the best of the creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should honor yourself by only submitting to one Allah. But you lower yourself, you disgrace yourself by bowing to something that you have created with your mind or created with your hands. So this is also unfair. You're being unfair to yourself. No matter how you look at it, the greatest form of wrong is that a person ascribes something to someone when they haven't done it. And the person denies someone the credit of having done something that they have. So it's the greatest form of bullying. So the advice of Luqman for his son began with Tawheed. And in this is a lesson for parents that the first phase of education for our children has to be building a strong foundation of Iman. This is where ta'aleem has to begin. What parents do is they build the child's foundation on introducing themselves to the child. They explain to the child that I do this for you, I do this for you, I do this for you, I do this for you. I've done this, I do this, I've done this, I do this. So the initial introduction to the child is to the parents. So for a while, for a few years, the child is very impressed and very amazed that my parents are doing so much for me, but eventually the child gets fed up with it also. And when the child grows up, they realize that, well, no, it's not my father or my mother who's doing all of that. They also have to work for it. So they work at such and such place and they get money from there, and with that money they're doing it. So there's somebody else who's sustaining even them. So they start looking higher up the food chain. So it's not my parents that are in control here. Somebody else is in control of them as well. So the appreciation for the parent decreases. That level of reverence that one has for the parent decreases. And when this progresses, and at the same time the child is growing up and becoming independent to the point where they now have opportunities to go and earn for themselves. You say, well, you know what? I don't really need you guys anymore. Thank you for everything you've done, but I don't need you. And if I don't need you, then why should I care for you? I'm going off now on my own. So this is what happens, and this is what is happening in the world. But if the child from day one is filled with love for Allah and devotion to Allah, first, Allah is the doer. He is the giver and the taker. He is one that gives you help. He's one who tests you by making you sick. And the child's connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is correct. And their belief in Allah is correct. They recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He is. Then this child is going to appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. And because of their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're going to appreciate their parents, irrespective of whether the parents are earning for them or not earning for them. Whether the parents are giving them their favorite toys or not giving them their favorite toys. Why? Because the child's loyalty is to Allah. And the first command of Allah after Iman is your parents. وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. So when the child's bond with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is strong, they will know that I have to take care of my parents because Allah, who is the ultimate authority, Allah has told me to do such. And even far beyond, much after the child has become independent from their parents, they will still have that level of commitment, that level of love and appreciation and respect. Why? Because Allah has told them to. They've moved on from their parents, but they know that I can never be independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as long as that is the case, I must listen to Allah, I must obey the commandments of Allah, and one of the greatest and most important commandments I have to take care of my parents. So this is the correct approach to raising children. Build the familiarity of the child with their creator first. So this is how Luqman started the education of his son. And then at this point Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interjects. He doesn't quote Luqman, he attributes it to himself. وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ. We advise the human being regarding his parents. So the advice to look after one's parents is not coming from Luqman, it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To make people realize that this has been emphasized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala since the time Allah created the human being. The It's not just something in Islam or in the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Since the beginning of mankind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained that a person must always care for and look after their parents. And one example of the parents' sacrifice is mentioned here. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَهْنًا عَلَى وَهْنٍ. His mother carried him. After one weakness and another weakness, وَهْنًا عَلى وَهْنٍ. Any mother, being a female, is already at some disadvantage because she is physically weaker in most cases. But on top of that, on top of being physically frail or weak, weaker than a man would normally be, she carries on, she undertakes another weakness. What is that? The whole process of carrying a child. It makes her even weaker. It makes her even more incapable. It makes her so limited. Exhaustion, being tired, and having all her energy depleted, and at the same time doing so many. So wahnan ala wahnin, weakness upon weakness. And then once the child is born, there is a whole ordeal revolving around childbirth. A great deal of pain is involved, difficulties involved. And it doesn't just stop there. It's not like the child is born, okay, child is born, my job is done. No. Then she feeds him, suckles him or her for another 2 years. So look at that commitment. Huge level of commitment. And that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. So she becomes the source of the birth of the child, and then she looks after it. But normally mothers don't just give away their children after 2 years. They look after them for the rest of that child's childhood. So the story goes on. Staying up all night, being unable to rest when the child is sick, worrying about clothing and feeding and cleaning, and doing this and doing that, and training them and teaching them, and doing all kinds of things. It just goes on and on and on and on. The job of a mother never ends. The father on the other side is working, slaving, day in and day out, to make sure his children have what they need. The raw materials, the bread and butter, the money that family needs so that they can continue to function. Day in and day out, the father doesn't think of himself. He's thinking about his children, he's thinking about his dependents, and just slaving. And this process is not a short process. Fathers don't work for a year or two and then they relax for the rest of their lives. They work all their lives until their children no longer need anything. Parents don't really work, they don't really live for themselves, they live for their children. By the time their children have grown up, the parents are too old to do anything for themselves, practically speaking. They're too old now to earn for themselves, or to build something for themselves. Gone, that life is past. They've reached the age now where they're exhausted and they're tired. So, there must be a level of commitment to these great people. There must be. On behalf of the one, remember, if a person is grateful, they have that quality of gratitude, then they will be first grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having given them all of this, for having given them those parents. And they will be grateful to the parents as well. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says that the one who is not thankful to people for the good they do is not thankful to Allah either. Your parents do something good to you, good for you, you say, no, I'm not thanking you, I'm thanking Allah. If you don't show thanks, if you don't show gratitude, to people when they do good things to you, it means you're not being grateful to Allah, because it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who enabled them, who used them as a means of taking care of you, looking out for you. Then the passage goes on. وَإِنْ جَاهَدَكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. If your parents happen to be non-Muslims and they force you to commit shirk, to take gods other than Allah, then in that matter you won't obey them. In those regards you will not take their instructions, because there is a greater, a broader commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is our creator. So there is no disobedience to Allah. There's no disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And especially when it comes to listening to someone, obeying someone, there's no obedience to anyone if it leads to disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no obedience to makhluk if it leads to disobedience of the Khaliq. Alright. However, the fact that they're non-Muslim does not give you the permission to now look down at them, insult them, make life difficult for them, or say, you know what, I have nothing to do with you anymore. I've accepted Islam and that's it. I'm going my own way. Absolutely not. Sahibhuma, stay with them. في الدنيا معروفا, in the best way possible. Stay with them. Look after them. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or they're not Muslim. They're still your parents. They still have a right on you. And this part of Islam helps us realize, understand, that it's not just Muslims that have rights on us. There are many kinds of people that have rights on us. Our neighbors have rights on us irrespective of their religion. The people we travel with on the bus have rights on us irrespective of their religion. Our teachers, even in public schools, have rights on us irrespective of their religion. Somebody who is kind to us or helps us out has a right on us. Of course, parents have the greatest right, irrespective of their religion. So you don't listen to them in the matter of belief, but you must stay with them in this world, accompany them, and treat them in the best way possible. And وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيْهِ, follow the path of those who have turned towards me. Follow the path of those who have turned towards me. Now Mufassirin have mentioned that this verse, this particular verse, was revealed when Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu was trying to migrate. And his mother was giving him a hard time. She said that if you migrate to Medina, this surah was revealed in Makkah. If you migrate to Medina, if you leave me, then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'm going to sit outside in the burning hot sun, I'm not going to take any shade over me, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to die. So he was obviously very worried, he was perturbed. What should I do? So these verses were revealed about him. Look, in these matters you don't obey, but you have to still take care of them, look after them, do whatever you can. Umar radiallahu anhu told him, look, this is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's something you cannot compromise. It's not something that it's an extra, it's an optional act, it's a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your mother wants you to come back, she wants you to, basically she wanted him to revert back to polytheism, become a mushrik. So regarding these matters, don't listen. And yes, she has sworn that she's not going to eat, she's not going to comb her hair, she's not going to drink anything, she's not going to take shade. But you know what? When she feels the heat, she's going to go inside. When she feels the hunger, she will eat. If she feels the thirst, she will drink. So don't worry, she's going to be okay, but you cannot leave your faith just because she is saying so. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيْهِ, follow the path of the one who has turned towards me. Many Mufassirin say that this is referring to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Because upon accepting Islam, his parents also hadn't immediately accepted Islam. His father, Abu Quhafa, accepted Islam much, much later. But he was always very kind and gentle with his parents. He always looked after them. So follow the path of those kinds of people. But anaba ilayya, those who have turned towards me. ثُمَّ إِلَيَّ مَرْجِعُكُمْ وَنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. And then keep in mind that after all of this is over, you are all coming back to me. All of you have to come back to me, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to inform you about what you used to do. So here Luqman goes forward and explains to his son how careful he needs to be about his deeds, how diligent he needs to be. He says, يا بني إنها إن تك مثقال حبة من خردل فتكن في صخرة أو في السماوات أو في الأرض يأتي بها الله إن الله لطيف خبير. Allah is going to tell us everything that we've done, like is mentioned in the previous verse. But we need to be extremely, extremely careful. Because on that day, the act that we have done, even if it's as minute as a mustard seed is something that if you were to put on your fingertip, you could not feel its weight. If you were to put it on a scale, it wouldn't change the scale. It's so light. So even if it's as small as a mustard seed, and then you take that deed and try to hide it somewhere. In other words, you do it very, very secretly. It is in some mountain somewhere. Or it's up in the heavens somewhere. Or it's underground. You take it and hide it somewhere. Yes, Allah will reproduce that deed in front of you on the day. We can't do anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unaware of. We can't do something and hide it from Allah. We can't do something and expect to avoid accountability. Every single deed counts. So this is the next major lesson that Luqman is teaching his son, and that is the lesson of piety, of being aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know what? I'm not watching you all the time, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you all the time. He is aware of what you're doing. I might not be there to watch what you do in class or outside in the playground during your breaks at school. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. And maybe today you could fool me by making up a story, by giving me a different version. But on the day of judgment, you will not be able to tell another version. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to tell you about it. So nothing is hidden from you. So these are some very powerful lessons. Now imagine a child who grows up with this as their foundation. This awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, state of consciousness about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is embedded into their system. This person is going to grow up as a believer, as an upright person, as someone who is always afraid of accountability and is always very careful of what they do. So those are the kinds of people that we need to try to become. Those are the kinds of people that are needed today. And these are the kinds of children that we should be trying to raise. The rest of this, inshallah, we'll try to complete next week. May Allah give us the good after that.